My husband Aaron suggested to me that I do this vlog as we watch the events of the last few days, the protests kind of unfold before our eyes. Initially, I'll admit I was very hesitant because I didn't want to inadvertently come across as tone deaf in any way, because that would never be my intention. But as my husbands, my daughters, and I discussed and tried to make sense of what we were hearing through the stories that were being shared and the images that were filling our social media, I really began to feel I had a moral obligation to use my platform, no matter how limited it may be, to speak out. You don't have to look far to see the inhumanity that seems to exist in our world today. The lack of compassion, the absence of the basic respect that everyone without exception deserves. As a woman, as a visible minority, I have faced some degree of racism. There have been times, particularly when I was younger, that I felt what I thought was the burden of the color of my skin, that I felt less than, that I felt backs turned in my direction. There were times when how I looked quite obviously made me unqualified for some task I wanted or some accolade I thought I deserved. My husband Aaron, who is also the same background, faced more instances of physical violence and threats as he was growing up. Because racism is not binary, it's a spectrum of experience. Any degree should of course not be tolerated, and I would never minimize the plight of any minority. But truly, as empathetic as I thought I was when I would hear the media speak of the injustices and horrors that our Black community faced, I now know that I truly knew nothing of its impact. What I experienced personally as racism, based on what has happened in my own life, is by comparison very, very different. As I actively listened these past days to the stories that have been shared, as I've heard how deeply these injustices have impacted our Black community, as woke as I considered myself to be, no matter how informed I thought I was, I am now humbled. Because I truly did not understand how entwined the disgusting ugliness of racism has infiltrated every aspect of life in our Black community. And that's on us. Because we as a society fail when we degrade part of us or fail to stand up when we recognize the problem. And when you are, for whatever reason, not aware enough, not educated enough, you don't act. And that has to change. And when you become more aware of the depth of racism, the way it has worked its way insidiously yet in plain sight to become part of the accepted culture, you begin to look closer at your own microcosm of this world, your own area of influence for any inequalities that may exist. Maybe they're not to the same degree, of course, maybe not purposeful, of course, but inequalities nevertheless. For me, this means looking at my family first, my social community after that, and then, in my case, my Parkinson's community. Because you see, I've lived with the challenges of Parkinson's now for well over 2 decades, and have tried to serve this amazing group of people through education and advocacy. I have not come across overt racism in this inspiring group of people at all. Because, in fact, we are all united by the same unwavering battle we face, united against a disease that is, in fact, colorblind. Thankfully, in the Parkinson's community, the real issues of diversity and representation are already being recognized and addressed by organizations like the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Davis Finney Foundation, Dance for Parkinson's, the Brian Grant Foundation, Cure Parkinson's Trust, World Parkinson Congress, and I'm sure many, many other great organizations serving our community. Regardless, though, we still have much to learn, much to understand, much work to do. Why, in fact, is diversity in this setting so important? Well, even though I'm a prime example that this disease knows no boundaries based on geography, gender, age, ethnicity, or race, that's not what I see in my work. Yet it is those differences that actually matter. A large majority of the world's 6 million people with Parkinson's disease don't have basic access to medical management of this illness. They don't have access to the very basic medication, one that has been available for over 60 years, the basic medication without which I wouldn't be able to move or sometimes stop moving, without simply, I wouldn't function without it. That is a real problem. If we see that problem, why are we not doing more? Do their struggles not resonate the same over the miles that separate us? I don't really know. But we really don't even have to look that far to see the cultural and racial differences have somehow resulted in whole groups of people in the Parkinson's community from becoming, and I believe this to be unintentional and unknowingly, but they become marginalized. Awareness and education is not the privilege of the few, nor should it be. Yet it is. Being educated about this disease is unequivocally beneficial. It means having the knowledge to become a participant in your own management, an advocate in seeking the medical care you need. You learn what changes you can make in your life, taking charge of the variables that you do have control over. Being educated allows you to make changes that will ultimately change your life experience, ultimately improve your quality of life. Yet there are communities that we are not reaching for whatever reason, be they cultural, socioeconomic, or differences in language. And those communities, I worry, may not be receiving the care they deserve. They may be worse off than they should be. That's why we have to reach out and learn. Educate ourselves about what those barriers are, why our reach is limited. We have to do better. And inclusivity will ultimately benefit us all as a global Parkinson's community. In a disease like Parkinson's, much like many other diseases, genetics seems to load the gun and environment likely pulls the trigger. We know that genetic differences that we see in, say, the Ashkenazi Jewish community or the Berbers of Africa, for instance, lead to an increased risk for Parkinson's disease. That there are genetic changes in these groups and others, of course, that may hold the secret to the mechanisms of this disease in all Parkinson's patients, regardless of ethnic background. We stand to learn a lot from studying this disease in different groups, but if you look at those recruited for research, they are by far older, usually male, and white. Now, I won't go any further without first acknowledging and conveying the deep respect that I have for anyone that participates in research. Without those that sacrifice their time, energy, and literally parts of themselves to further the work of our research community, there can be no better treatments or ultimately a cure. I'm forever grateful for their selflessness. But will the study of such a narrow group of people lead to those treatments that we so desperately need? One can argue that yes, perhaps, because there has been some progress. But more than 200 years since this disease was first characterized, we still have no absolute understanding of what causes it. The gold standard of treatment of Parkinson's is over 60 years old, and this continues to be a progressive neurodegenerative disease for which there's no cure. And that is not from lack of dedicated work by clinicians and researchers. But we have much work to do, and that work can only benefit from the inclusivity of all. We may share some of the same burdens of our diagnosis, but the answer may actually lie in our differences. These are some of the reasons that the good work that has already begun needs to continue and be prioritized. But let's get back to the original purpose of this post. To be part of the movement to end this unjustifiable, inhumane, unbelievable treatment of a group of people based on the color of their skin. That is what is most important. But whether you're trying to address the issues that affect your own microcosm or wrap your mind around the travesties that so obviously exist in the world, you must first seek to understand, and then I believe you're morally obligated to act. And even though the images and stories I hear right now are really so disheartening, I do have hope that we can make a change. Because in the words of prolific author and visionary Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better.